Now, let's talk a little bit more about Kyoto, because as we've been saying, the Kyoto Protocol comes into force today. It requires countries to cut emissions of the main greenhouse gases believed to contribute to global warming. The average temperature of the Earth's surface has risen by 0.6 degrees Celsius since the late 1800s, and it's expected to keep on rising by between 1.4 and 5.8 degrees by the end of this century. The main reason for that is the past 150 years of industrialisation and the subsequent increase of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These gases keep some of the sun's warmth from reflecting back into space, and without them, the world would be a cold and barren place. But in increasing quantities, they're pushing the global temperature to artificially high levels and altering the climate. The 1990s appear to have been the warmest decade of the last millennium, and 1998 was the warmest year. So, is Kyoto going to help? Dr Paul Toyne is with me. He's from Article 13, a consultancy that advises companies on climate change. And Kendra Okonsky joins us, the Sustainable Development Director from the free market think tank, the International Policy Network, as you can see in our studios at Westminster this afternoon. Good afternoon to both of you. Paul, first of all, do you have any optimism that Kyoto will help, given that the world's biggest polluter, the United States, hasn't signed up?
I think it's important to recognise that Kyoto is not the be-all and end-all. It's not going to solve the problem of climate change, but it's a step in the right direction. And at the moment, it literally is the only game in town whereby the world's governments can actually meet and discuss and make commitments to try and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide they're emitting. Has great problems, the fact that the US hasn't ratified it, Australia included, and the fact that China and India as emerging economies are set really to, blow our minds in a sense in terms of the scale of pollution they're going to be emitting in the next 20 or 30 years. So there are problems, but the most important thing is it provides a political framework whereby we can start to engage governments on this issue.
Kendra, it's not a panacea. There are problems such as areas like India that Paul was just talking about, but we have to start somewhere, and this is a good start.
I think Paul is right. It's a political gesture, essentially, and I find it ironic that in this whole debate, we don't see environmental groups going and protesting against the real problems in this world, indoor air pollution or dirty water. It's just not sexy enough for them, and climate change is. You can put up a picture of a polluting factory and say, oh, well, we're causing this problem, but really, climate change ought to be one of many priorities for us. And those problems I've just mentioned, we know how to solve those problems. We know that Kyoto is going to be a cost-ineffective way of addressing climate change. And in fact, the Framework Convention on Climate Change says that measures that we take to address climate change should be cost-effective. So if Kyoto violates the Framework Convention, then we really ought to, I think, scrap it all together, and I think the US and Australia have been correct in their decisions not to ratify.
Well, then how are you going to deal with all those issues of global warming that we just outlined then, if you're just going to hold up your hands?
Well, I don't think we should hold up our hands at all. I think the world should rally around if there are going to be negative consequences of climate change, then we ought to deal with those problems directly. That is, invest in medicines and technologies to stop malaria, to stop the transmission of malaria, to invest in agricultural technologies, to look at why water scarcity is a problem in poor countries. And if those are going to be the real negative problems that come from climate change, investing in those problems rather than trying to change the climate to stop those problems is the best we could do right now.
Paul, we should look at things that we can deal with, can tackle.
I think, we need a, two or even three-pronged approach. We need the political will, we need the governance that supplies, the regulation if necessary, and we need business and industry to start to innovate and provide some of the technical solutions to some of these problems. It's a complicated world, but if we don't do anything, the problem is going to get worse, and we're actually at a stage where, anything we start to do now will hopefully change the future, but not now, but in 20 or even 30 years' time. So, I think, we do need more political support, but after all, there is a social responsibility issue here. There's a certain amount of distrust amongst governments and also against the private sector. You ask society today, who do they trust? They don't trust those two groups. So I'm not convinced that we should just be saying, okay, let the free market economy decide, because there's a well-known case that businesses, some of them, wait until the last possible moment to actually change. Sometimes you need that stick of government legislation and regulation to get an industry to act.
Kendra, the Bush administration, for example, and in Australia too, they're not being socially responsible.
I think that we have a responsibility to our fellow human beings who have not had the benefits of of industrialization. All of those people that we speak of in India and China today suffer because they are not wealthy, and they are much more vulnerable to climate in general. So the best thing that we can do is not waste money on fruitless efforts such as Kyoto that are going to be very costly today. In Britain, it may cost 400,000 jobs, and the ongoing effects of that of Kyoto would be to increase the cost of consumer goods. So if we're going to waste money on a project that reduces the temperature by 0.1 degrees Celsius in 100 years, we can do much more good today, and by doing that good today, we can do good for our children and our grandchildren in the future.
Paul, developing nations are a problem. I mean, this is a real issue. I include even in China in this, when we hear figures like China has built the same number of nuclear stations that Britain has power stations, that Britain has in total in a single year.
Well, hang on, let's be clear about this. China has ratified the Kyoto Protocol, but as a developing country, doesn't have to commit to any targets to reduce its emissions. Now, the point is that China actually has got quite an ambitious energy program where it recognises the impact of climate change on its own nation, and in particular the vulnerable, that was being mentioned before. So it has an investment program which is quite progressive on renewable energies, things like wind and solar. But in addition, for the coal burn power stations that it does have, why not be using the most up-to-date technology so that we can actually reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's emitted through them? And here there's an opportunity, and this is where the free market could come into play, where British technology, the Americans or whatever, could be providing those types of technical solutions to the Chinese, to the Indians, and to whoever who needs it.
Well, Kendra, I could see an area of agreement there. Kendra was nodding throughout all of that. I wish we could have more time to talk about renewable energy. Kendra Okonsie there in Westminster, and Dr Paul Toyne, thank you very much indeed. Talk to you again on this issue, I'm quite sure. Thanks very much for now.